Okay, hey everybody, welcome back to tonight's stream. Sorry about last night, we missed. I actually had some technical difficulties, and make sure this thing's still bringing in the Yeti here. There we go. So everything's working well. Yeah, last night, man, the computer went down and couldn't. By the time I finally got it fixed, it was so late, there was no way for me to do it. So anyway, so tonight, because of that, we are going to go back and do Tuesday's lesson, because Tuesday's was really important, and I don't want to miss it. As you can see, Papa's not here. He's doing a Bible study with his buddy, with some people that are planning to get baptized. So I'm going to be doing this in English. Unfortunately, there'll be no interpretation tonight, but that's okay. Most of you guys out there, I think even our family, hey guys in India, I think you guys can speak enough English to understand what I'm saying. So let's see what we can do here. You can see here I'm sharing my screen. So we're going to go up here to Tuesday's lesson, where it says Paul and the unknown God. So we're still here in Acts 17. Paul is in Athens, and he's, in that marketplace. If you remember, the name of that area was like the I can't remember. It was that really weird, that weird name, that weird A word. I can't remember what it was. But it was a place there in Athens where everybody went to have discussions, kind of like a town center. They went there to, let's see, I'm going to pull up that name of that place. Where was it at here? Here it is, the Areopagus, right? So Paul's in this area, right, this town center, and he's sharing the gospel. He's sharing Christ with these people. So let's take a look here at what's actually going on. It starts out by saying, notice that Paul did not disparage the false religion or false gods of the Athenians. He gathered whatever points of good he could find, few as they were, and capitalized on them. The first question was, what was Paul doing here in his attempt to reach these people with the gospel? So if we click this, let's see if we click it, what happens? Okay, you can see here it says, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, but this is what I am going to proclaim to you. So that's pretty interesting, right? So the author of this lesson says about that comment, right? People of Athens, I see that you are in every way very religious. So he says Paul was complimenting the pagans. That's interesting, right? Because he says their religion was misguided in every way, and yet Paul complimented their devotion. And, I think there's something to be said for that, right? Because, we don't all agree on everything, right? Every religion thinks something different. But there's something to be said about commitment and devotion. Just in and of itself, right? When you see somebody that's really committed to something, it's quite compelling. And, Paul saw these people, and whether they were right or wrong, right? He was just so impressed by their devotion to even just, their idols. They were so committed. And I think that's really important because, as Christians, we look at other religions and sometimes we can look down on them, or we can look judgmental, be judgmental about them. But I think that sometimes we should do what Paul did, right? Because remember, this whole lesson is about how do we reach out to these people, right? The whole lesson was, if I scroll back up, let's see, if we go back up to the top, right? The whole topic of this week's lesson is mission to the unreached, part 1, right? So everything is about how did Paul go about seeking to reach these people, and what can we learn from his attempts, right? So on Sunday, we kind of saw how Paul was just, becoming familiar with them, and how he was, becoming acquainted with their culture. We see on Monday that Paul went in there and started talking to people and sharing his ideas. And then at the bottom it says that he showed himself familiar with their works of art, right? So Paul was becoming familiar. He was trying to understand the people that he was reaching out to, and we made the point that we often want to be understood, but Paul was like, well, before they can understand me, maybe I should try to understand them. And that was a huge thing, right? So then when you get down here on Tuesday, Paul's at it again. And, he's talking to these people. And as we were saying that, a lot of these other religions, they might be wrong, or we feel that they're wrong, but their devotion is just so compelling. Like you look at Muslims, for instance, and they pray, and they're so devout often. And, I wish Christians sometimes, we should look at ourselves and ask ourselves that if we are as correct as we think we are, why are we not as committed, as some of these other faiths are? And, it's just really compelling. And, and Paul took that moment to actually compliment them, right? And I think that that's a good way to reach out to people, is to always kind of lead with something nice, right? And that's probably not even in the religious world. I think that's probably the case in every situation. When you meet people, you at a party, your first day at work, whatever. I think you should lead with something nice, something complimentary towards the people that you're wanting to connect with. And I think that will go a long way, right? Kind of hard to connect and reach people if, the second they meet you, you just start complaining or criticizing, and, you leave a really bad impression. And so here Paul was making a great first impression with these guys. He was finding anything he could about them that was noble, or, or that had any virtue. Excuse me. And, he took advantage of that, right? Paul would do anything to compliment them. And, excuse me, this flu, man, I'm still trying to kick it. But it makes me think about, the method that Jesus had, and you could look at the life of Jesus, but I'm thinking specifically about in the book of Revelation. When you look in the book of Revelation, Jesus gives John letters to, messages. He tells him to write these churches letters, 7 churches. And in basically every single church, Jesus tells John, this is what I want you to write. Tell them that I know them, and I know how hard they're trying, and I know all of these positive things, right? And he goes, boom, 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 boom. It's all these positives. And I can imagine that when those members, when the members of those churches received that letter, and they read it, and they open it up, and the beginning is, oh, you're fantastic, you're doing this great, and you're doing that great, and you're trying so hard, and I notice, people immediately open up, right? And they connect with you. And then as you continue to read that letter, though, Jesus kind of gets into the, but with all that said, kind of thing. I've got a few things I want to talk to you about. And I think that it was because he led with the positive that they were probably open to hearing the negative. And here you see Paul kind of doing the same thing. Paul, he's opening up. Like his first shot is, hey, you guys are really religious. Wow, you guys, that's impressive. And I think that can go a long way with us. So when you're out there trying to reach people that don't share your faith, try to find something, anything, right? If you look here at the bottom of Tuesday's lesson, it asks this question, what bridges and points of contact can you think of, right? That would open up opportunities. And so, and this kind of goes back to even the day before, right? So if you go back up into Monday, it says that Paul showed himself familiar with their works of art, their literature, the religion, et cetera, et cetera. And, it goes back to, Christians need to be knowledgeable, right? We need to understand the world around us, the culture around us, if we want to reach out to these people. It's really easy for us to, kind of cluster ourselves away from everything and think, oh, we're going to, shelter ourselves. And to a certain extent, I get it, right? Because you don't want to get wrapped up in nonsense. But, there's a point where Christians need to be aware, man. We need to be informed, right? We need to be informed, and, Paul was informed. And I think with us, it can be something as simple as sports, right? If you live in a town or you live in a country and, like here in England, I have to understand something about soccer, right? I just have to, even though I hate the game. I think it's dumb. I have to understand something about it. It opens up a million opportunities for me to get into discussions with people, where people from England move to America, it would take a minute, man, and understand how to play some baseball or learn how to play American football or learn the rules or something, anything, right? And it just creates a way to make bonds with people. I hate contemporary music. I just hate it, for the most part. But at least I take a listen every now and then to hear what's out. I know what's on the radio. It's like there's a Taylor Swift. I know that person's out there somewhere, and I know that there's like Billie Eilish and there's Drake and there's I know all these people. So I don't really so even though I don't like them and I don't listen to their music, I at least know that it's out there, and so I can strike up conversations with them about it. So anyway. I just thought that was really important about Tuesday's lesson and reaching out to people. But Wednesday, right, introducing a new God. So when Paul went up there, he saw that they had an altar built, and it said, to the unknown God. And so when you read Acts 17, 24 through 27, I have it open here, 24 through 27. This is what Paul says to them. He says that this is the God who made the world and everything in it. It's the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in temples built by hands. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything from us, right? Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath. From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you go back to the lesson, Paul is making the point when he says, what approach was Paul taking here in an attempt to reach these people? He says, for a people who cared enough about spiritual things to build an altar to a God that they didn't even know, Paul's words must have been intriguing, right? A creator who doesn't live in a temple, doesn't need anything from humans, right? This is completely antithetical. It's completely opposite of all of their conceptions of gods, right? In fact, it even goes on to say, for a culture steeped in Greek mythology, in which the gods were unpredictable, self-centered, and cruel. The description that Paul had of this unknown God had to be intriguing. And the author suspects that some of these people begin to take their first steps to accepting Christ. And then this is a very important point. It's the fact that this God whom they did not know, right? It said to the unknown God. He makes the point that this God could be known. And that's a fascinating thing about Christian faith, right? Is we call our religion a religion of revelation. Everything we know about God is because God himself chose to introduce himself. He chose to reveal himself. We can't go up to heaven and introduce him, introduce ourselves to him. So God knew that if we were going to know anything about him at all, if we were going to have any kind of relationship, he had to take the first step and introduce himself, right? And so it's fascinating that the very God that they thought was unknown was the one God that actually did everything he possibly could to be known. Then he goes on to say, Paul probably spoke longer there, right? Because Luke is recording this incident. And, obviously everything in the Bible that you read about, every story, you can't think that that was the entirety of the story, right? These authors were not writing exhaustive, testimonials or descriptions of every single thing that happened. They were summarizing. And the reason is because in the book of John, he says that if everybody wrote everything that Jesus did or these apostles did, that there wouldn't be enough books in the whole world to contain all of that information, right? So we're just getting a little snapshot of a lot of this stuff, right? It's like Adam, in chapter 1 and 2, you see Adam, he's created. Chapter 3, they sin. Chapter 4, Cain and Abel getting introduced. Chapter 5, Adam's dead, right? That's it. That's all you really get of Adam. And it says he lived 930 years. So we barely got anything out of Adam, right? Out of that story. So anyway, my light just went off. That's weird. So, so we go down and it says, let's see, Paul spoke longer probably. So then it goes on to say, Paul first complimented their spiritual awareness and sincerity, right? Again, complimenting. Next, he showed that he himself had studied their belief, right? And found some things that he respected, right? I have a friend that I work with that's a Sikh. He's Punjabi. And I love asking him questions about his faith. And oftentimes I know a little bit about it because obviously my family, my in-laws are Punjabi. And so they're familiar with the Sikh religion. So oftentimes when I say things to my friend, he's like, oh, wow, you know about that? You know about this? And it connects with him that I've taken the time to learn something about his faith. And then he realizes he doesn't know anything about my faith. And he makes him want to kind of reciprocate. What else here? 3. So he told him about one particular thing that he had discovered in his study of their religion, that they admitted they did not understand. After that, he shared the aspect of God that he knew that they needed, which is the fact that God exists and he loves them and is not far away. And finally, Paul warns them what would happen if they reject this knowledge, right? I think number 3 is really important because sometimes, when you start questioning people about their own religion, their own faith, they start to realize, maybe our faith can't explain a lot of things, maybe the way we thought, and things like that. And so when Paul brought up a few questions that stumped them, they began to realize that maybe there were some elements of their faith and religion that were a little bit contradictory. And so, but Paul would have never been able to do that if he didn't take the time to understand their faith. And so at the bottom here at the end, it says Paul took them as far as he could based on what he knew about what they believed. If he could get them that far, he was making good progress, right? And then you get down to the question again. Notice Paul's appeal to the created world and to God as the creator. Why is this such a good approach to take, at least as a start, with most people? What is it about the created world that points so powerfully to God? Right? So as I said at the beginning of this week, I'm not going to answer that question. I want you to just think about it. Maybe leave some answers down in the comment box about why you think this is. Why is it do you think that Paul appealed to the creation to try to help them understand the Creator? So leave some comments down below what you think. And then at the end of the week, we'll go back and kind of look at all of these 5 main thought questions, and we'll go back and talk about some of the answers. So anyway, with that being said, Thursday, tomorrow night, crossing the line, how does Paul continue his witness? So we'll take a look at that tomorrow evening. But for now, thank you guys for joining. I hope you enjoyed this little kind of just run through as I'm reading it, because I'm always intentionally making sure that I read it for the first time with you. So, I'm thinking it through while I'm reading it, the same as you probably are. And I can't wait for some of you guys to jump in on this live so you can leave some messages, in the chat box so we can make this interactive and I can chat with you back and forth. Because I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So with that being said, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. We really want a lot of people to join and watch and listen to this and give us their feedback so we can create a little community here where we can share our faith in Christ. So, okay, I think it's time to pray now, and then we'll call it a night, okay? So let's pray. Father in heaven, we just thank you so much for this evening. We thank you for this 15-20 minutes that we've spent talking about you and thinking about Paul, thinking about, how brilliant he was as he reached out to these people in Athens. Thank you for, inspiring Luke to write all of this down so we can go back now here 2,000 years later and study it and understand it. And, it's important because of Paul, because of these early apostles, the gospel went to the whole world and it began to spread. Just these few men. And I think it's for our good, Lord, that it was written down, that we can look at what they did and learn from them. So help us to be like Paul. Help us to find things positive about people. Help us to find kind words to say to people, not always negative. And help us to just, be wise as we try to reach out to others the way you were wise, the way Paul was wise. And if we can't say anything nice, Lord, please help us to control our mouth and keep our mouth shut if we're not going to say anything kind. But I know that when we meet people, we can always find something. We're all human beings, right? In fact, these verses say that, that you created out of one person every race, to dwell on the earth. And so we're all humans. And so we all feel the same things many times, and we think and want the same things. So help us, Lord, to find those things and connect with those things before we start trying to, teach people things or to correct them or share the gospel. They need to be ready to receive these types of things before we share such life-changing messages. So help us with those things, Father. Forgive our sins. Continue to give us good health and safety as the weather turns cold and as we move towards Christmas. May we all be kind to each other. We look forward to seeing you again and speaking with you again tomorrow night for Thursday's lesson. And we thank you for this time. And we ask you to bless us, not for our sakes, but for your Son's sake, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, guys, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. And share it with all your friends. Share it with your churches. And it'll be a good, maybe a study guide to help you guys get ready for Sabbath. And maybe you'll have some comments, or this will spark some ideas for you, okay? See you tomorrow night.